Hi there, business owner. Do you want a better understanding of business finance, what your numbers actually mean, and stories of the highs and lows of business, where I'll be sharing my tips and tricks every week? Then you're in the right place. Welcome to the 3Bs podcast with Stephanie. Hello, welcome back to another episode of the 3Bs podcast with Stephanie. Can I just take a minute to say thank you so much for all the messages, comments, likes, rates, reviews on the podcast I've had in the last week since episode 1 went live and since the trailer went live. It really does mean the world, and I actually found it a little overwhelming. I guess I didn't expect quite as many of you to listen as you did, but I'm so grateful. So thank you so much, because by you listening, rating, reviewing, sharing it far and wide with fellow business owners, I get to make more episodes and help more businesses, which is what I want to do. So thank you so much. Let's get into the episode. So, before we get into allowable expenses, I just wanted to note the importance of keeping records. Whether you're a sole trader, a limited company, just starting out, it's so imperative that you track the income and expenses in your business. If you are struggling to find time to do that, then it is really important to find a certified bookkeeper or accountant who can help you. They're the experts, and I'd actually probably recommend a bookkeeper over an accountant for this, purely because they are primarily trained in the day-to-day running of a finance arm of a business, the day-to-day record keeping, which makes life much easier when you get to month end, quarter end, and then your end of year tax returns. They can do what they do best while you do what you do best. I often use the analogy of their hairdressers, where I go into the hairdressers and they say, "What would you like?" And I say, "I don't know, you're the expert, you tell me what's going to suit me." I do the same with a car. I don't take my car to the car garage and go, "This is what's wrong with my car, I need you to do X, Y and Z to it." I go in and say, "This is my problem, how can you help me? What is your solution for this? You're the expert, you tell me what needs to be done." That brings me on nicely to my top tip of the week. I think it's really important to keep a track of your personal expenses as well as your business expenses. I've been called a spreadsheet queen on more than one occasion, which I mentioned last week, because I have spreadsheets for everything. I keep a track of our household expenses with the cost of living crisis and electricity doubling. Amongst many other things, it's really important to keep a track of what you're bringing in is still sufficiently enough to cover your bills. I track our childcare, our fees for school clubs, football training, ballet, etc. for the children, holidays, even a food shopping budget. I don't always stick to it, but at least if I've got that figure and I know where we're at, it helps me to confidently buy that bottle of wine for that weekend, or that bottle of craft ale that I've had my eye on, or get a takeaway without it affecting our long-term household goals. So we want to build an extension on our house to give my son his own room. So I like to know that if we are going to go over budget slightly, or we're going to have that extra luxury, that it's not going to affect the long-term goal. We're not super strict with it, but it's the awareness of knowing where you are and knowing where you want to get to. Especially if it's getting to potentially time to remortgage your house with the way the interest rates are right now. Things like that are really important. So my top tip of the week is, don't have to go as extreme as I do, but just keep a track of one thing, one element for a week or a month, and then review it. If you get a coffee every day at work, or Costa's my vice. So if you get a Costa even 2-3 times a week, it's surprising how quickly that can add up and really eat into the money that you are bringing in, and track that against your goals. So yeah, that's my top tip of the week. Track your personal finances as well as your business finances. Let's talk about allowable business expenses. Not everything charged in the profit and loss account of a trade, profession or vocation is an allowable deduction for tax purposes. It's what it states on the HMRC's website. Now, your business is yours you spend the business's money how you see fit. So it's your business and it's your decision what you spend it on. However, not everything that you spend your money on in a business can necessarily be included for tax purposes as an allowable business expense. For example, a lot of sole traders claim mileage allowance, which I will cover in a later episode. But if you are a sole trader covering mileage allowance and you're putting fuel receipts through the business card, then we have to put the amount you've spent from the bank back into the account, because that's not an allowable business expense for tax purposes. You don't physically have to put the money back in. You can, but you don't have to. It can be done by a bookkeeper or an accountant who can manually journal things in and out to show a true reflection of the business in your financial statements. Another one is, the other side of it, is that the allowances are not always in your record. So, for example, use of home allowance, which I will cover in this episode, as it is one of the 3 most forgotten expenses I see in self-assessments, is that that's not a physical amount, that's a tax relief that you are allowed to claim. That is an allowable business expense, but that money does not physically leave your company account, your bank account, so it does not show on the profit and loss until it's manually added in. If you do want to find more specialised information specific to your business, then gov.uk is always the best place to go for the most up-to-date information. There are hundreds and hundreds of manuals on there. For example, the HMRC definition around allowable expenses was manual BIM, so Bravo Indigo Mike 37007. They're updated regularly, which is great. Now that we're in a digital world and everything's online, you can access the most up-to-date information on there. For example, this manual was last updated on the 7th of March 2023, so not even a month from, or just over a month from me recording this now, to when it was last updated. There used to be a downloadable PDF which would have like a list of areas and what you could claim and you couldn't claim. But because things change so quickly and so frequently, the journals and gov.uk is the best place to go. The other thing with a PDF is that business is, depending on the business type and depending on what the business actually does, an allowable expense will change from business to business. For example, if you're purchasing cars as a car garage that buys them to resell, they become a cost of goods sold. They become a stock item. Whereas a person who has an office, who does an administration business, maybe a VA, they're not going to be buying lots and lots of cars. They're going to be seen as assets of the business and not stock for the business. Also, if you are a baker, you may be going to a wholesaler's and buying sugar in 10, 20, 30 kilo bags. And that's an allowable business expense, because that is what a cost of goods sold. That is a material you need to make the cakes or the pastries you're making in your business. But somebody who, a car garage, for example, well, it shouldn't be buying 30 kilos of sugar at a time. It's not an allowable business expense. It's not for use in the business. So the PDF often left grey areas because you couldn't always apply the rules written on there necessarily in legislation to the business type. So looking at the manuals is the best place to go. If you're unsure of what would necessarily qualify for looking at the manuals, again, seek specialist advice from a certified bookkeeper or an accountant who can help you learn, if you want to, what is an allowable business expense for your specific business type. Okay, so the 3 most commonly forgotten business expenses that I see when doing self-assessments. When we do self-assessments for a client, we gather all the data, we get all the information, we draft the financial statement and a draft tax return, and then send them back to the client to review. If at that point we feel that there's things that potentially are missing, we will query the client and ask if those expenses were incurred, and if so, more information on that so we can include them in the tax return. These 3 are probably the most common that we then go back and ask about. Number 1 is the use of home allowance, which I mentioned earlier in the episode. A lot of businesses, when they start out, and a lot of small businesses do start out from home. It's much more cost effective, and I think it's the way that a lot of businesses start out. particularly sole traders or self-employed businesses. Now, the utilities, for example, and the use of home, a portion of that will be business use. And depending on how much business use there is, you can claim a proportion of those bills. That doesn't include telephone or internet expenses. Now, instead of manually calculating the percentage or the amount of rooms in the house of each bill, you can use what's called simplified expenses. So if you track the hours that are used per month, you can claim a flat rate each month, which can vary. So if you use 25 hours, you can claim 1 month. If you do 100 hours the next month, you can then claim that rate. So it is important to keep a track of the hours you are spending at home. For example, a lot of the construction clients we work with, so the plumbers, the electricians and the builders, they will do all their admin at home in an evening. They will do all their quoting and invoicing and ordering parts, etc. So those are the hours that would need to be counted. If you're using simplified expenses and you work 25 hours or more a month from home, that's when you can start using these expenses. So if you work 25 to 50 hours per month, it's £10. 51 to 100 hours per month is £18, and 101 hours or more per month is £26. Secondly is mobile phone bill. Now this is probably most common when they don't have a separate work phone. So if you're using your personal phone for business use, we calculate the percentage of business use and we use the percentage amount to claim as an allowable expense from your tax bill. And thirdly is mileage allowance. So if you are using your vehicle for business use, then you can claim a flat rate per mile with simplified expenses, as opposed to using the fuel receipts and then calculating the percentage of that fuel that you've put in your car that is actually for business use. Now, you cannot claim mileage allowance for getting to and from a specific point of work. So if you have an office or a standard point of work, you can't claim the mileage for that trip, but you can claim the mileage for if you go to the office and then go to a meeting and a meeting and a meeting, for example, or to the bank to deposit cash on behalf for the business and put the money in. That's also when you can claim the allowable expenses. So the simplified expenses change depending on whether you're using a car or a motorcycle. If you're using a car and it's the first 10,000 miles of a year, you can claim 45 pence per mile. Anything over that is 25 pence per mile within the year. If you use a motorcycle, it's 24 pence per mile, flat rate. If you would like to work out what would be more beneficial for you to claim on your self-assessment, whether it would be better to claim the actual percentage usage of your utilities and bills or you're using simplified expenses, there is a checker on the government website. So you can go to www.gov.uk/simplified-expenses-checker, and then you can type in your information there and it will let you know which is the better option for you to choose. And that brings us to the end of another episode. I can't believe how quickly 15 minutes flies by. I hope this was really helpful, and I'd really love for you to let me know on social media or to drop me a message and let me know what you would like me to cover in future episodes. What topics would you find really helpful for me to deep dive into? Next week, we are going to be covering payroll as we approach the first monthly payroll of the 2023-2024 tax year, as well as the national minimum wage and the difference between the national minimum wage and the national living wage. And thank you so much for listening. And that brings us to the end of another week of the 3Bs podcast with Stephanie. Thank you so much for listening. I'd really appreciate it if you could like, subscribe, rate and review this podcast wherever you are listening to it, so that I can reach more business owners and help them build better businesses. See you next week for the next episode.